He's wearing a combination of silver and
Look, it's the Prophecy Brothers.
Welcome to the Prophecy Brothers. I'm Brother Man with Brother Champion, or Brother Joe, as most everybody knows him at the church.
Welcome.
Joe, why don't you tell our audience who our guest is tonight?
Tonight's guest is Gary Ka. He's a preacher from Indianapolis. He's done a lot of research, had personal experience with basically the world government, or the people that are planning the world government. I talked to him at a conference in Indianapolis about a few months ago in May, and I knew that he needed to be on the show, warn people about what's going on. He has some books, videos, a lot of documentation proving that there's a world government being set up, just like the Bible says. It's going to happen in Revelation chapter 13. And Gary,
Well, let me. I want to go into a little bit of his background too. Gary's in the same state. We're in Indiana. Of course, if you're watching this on public access in the South Bend area, you know we're here. But if you're watching this on YouTube, we're in Indiana. Gary's from around the Indianapolis area, but he was a trade specialist, a Europe and a Mideast trade specialist for for the state of Indiana, from '81 to '85. And it's what he found out in that capacity that led him to write the first book, En Route to Global Occupation, and then he did a follow-up, New World Religion. And so, Gary, welcome to the Prophecy Brothers.
It's good to be with both of you. Appreciate it.
Glad you're on.
Can you tell us a little bit, maybe elaborate more on your background, and then what led you to write this book and some of the things that you've discovered, and then we'll just kind of go really ad-lib from there. So,
all right. I'll actually start with my parents. I'm the son of European immigrants. I was born over in the Dayton, Ohio area, but my parents both went through World War II as young people, and my father grew up in Croatia and had 1 or 2 days notice that the Nazis were coming in from one side, and the partisans, who ended up becoming known as the communists, were coming in from the other side. And he and the villagers in his area were forced to choose sides. His family decided they didn't want part of either, and so they, along with some other villagers, formed a wagon train and literally ran for their lives. And they lost everything they had except a few pots and pans and a couple suitcases full of clothes, and they made a run for it. And long story short, they ended up eventually passing through parts of Hungary and then hiding out in mountain areas of Austria, and around that time the war came to an end. After the war, Dad made it into Germany because he could speak German as one of 3 languages he knew, and they were rebuilding after the war. So that opened the door for he and his cousins to be able to go into Germany, get work, save up money, and to come to the United States, which was his dream. But while in Germany, he met my mother, who grew up there right through World War II, and her father, my grandfather, was very outspoken against Hitler to the point where his family feared for his life. In fact, Mom said they prayed for him regularly because they thought if he keeps talking the way he is, it's just going to be a matter of time till something happens. And sure enough, at one point, the Gestapo showed up in the mayor's office, and they were looking for my grandpa. And fortunately, the mayor was a good friend of the family. In fact, his daughter and my mother were best friends. They would just walk in and out of each other's houses, doors not even being locked. And so he wasn't about to rat on my grandpa. So he sent them in one direction and my grandpa in the other. Fortunately, nothing ever happened, and it was just a small town. But still, even in a small village of 300 people, they had a Nazi school teacher there who was put there to indoctrinate and propagate the kids. And, Hitler had things well under control. He knew who his enemies were, and he would send his henchmen even after people that you would think weren't all that important. Well, anyway, my mom and dad eventually got married. They came to the United States, and then I was born. And I remember at a pretty young age, in my elementary school years already, being at family reunions with my dad's cousins, and they would talk about war stories and what they went through and everything. And then in 6th grade, shortly after becoming a Christian, I remember studying world history in my classroom in Kettering, Ohio. I had an excellent teacher that year, and World War II was one of the things that came up that we talked about. And between that, what my parents had been mentioning over the years, it just all clicked, and I realized how unbelievable it was. I mean, if you think about it, Germany was a nation with a pretty strong Christian heritage if you go back. Right. And yet look at what happened there, And how did Hitler come to power? How did people not see that in advance? Or some did, as I would learn later, but not enough to be able to do anything about it. And anyway, I made a commitment there in my classroom saying, God, if anything were to ever happen in the United States, like what happened in Nazi Germany and Europe during World War II, I promise I will take a stand for you no matter what the cost. And I meant it, but as a kid, 11 and 12 years old, you never think that God's going to take you up on that someday.
Be careful what you ask for, right? Yeah.
That's right. So years passed, and I went through high school, ended up coming over here to Indiana for college. I met my wife here. She's an Indiana girl, and got married, and took a liking to international trade. I felt that was kind of the wave of the future, and Indiana was really hurting at the time, and I was really fascinated with the whole idea of exports, because the more you export, the more jobs it creates back home and helps offset the imports and the deficits and stuff. And so I landed a job at a young age working for then Lieutenant Governor John Mutz at the Indiana Department of Commerce, and I eventually became their Europe and Middle East trade specialist. And what that means is for those parts of the world, I was their point man overseas to try to bring in business to Indiana. I worked a lot with Indiana-based medical companies, which we have a lot of those here in the state, some automotive equipment companies, and also Indiana coal. So I got a little bit into the energy field. And to understand coal, I had to know something about their competition, which was oil. And so I began studying the oil industry and just a lot of interesting things I learned very early on. And within 6 months, actually not even that long, I was traveling overseas working on projects with our embassies to help out the state of Indiana. And eventually led trade missions overseas. The lieutenant governor went on some of those. And really got an education. You come out of college, you tend to be a little bit cocky. I focused on the international aspects of economics and business, and you think you have a pretty good grip on things, then you find out the world's a lot different than what you thought. Right. And so right off the bat, my first 7 countries I traveled to included, and we were going to try to export Indiana coal to these countries in Europe. I went to Israel, Greece, Italy, Germany, France, Belgium, and I think Spain was the other country. And a very successful trade mission. It ended up bringing in some money for the state of Indiana, helped the coal industry. And after that, a lot of doors opened up for me, and I continued to travel. And not just to Europe and the Middle East, but for medical products, I was over other parts of the world as well. So my travels took me to places like India, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, always working with our embassies who set up my meetings overseas. So I say that because I was on the payroll of the state government, but my meetings were organized through the federal government, through our embassies. So I got a look at how government works and what's going on. Okay, so that's the main part of the background. Now I can share with you a little bit about what I began to learn through these contacts. The embassies, the commercial sections of the embassies, I became friends with a lot of those people because usually we'd spend anywhere from 2 to 4 days together. And sometimes they would invite me over to their homes for dinner. And when that happens, you do more than just talk about international business. Although that's the starting point, we would begin talking about international economic trends, political developments. Sometimes we get into spiritual issues as well, religious issues going on in the world. It's really amazing the wide spectrum of things that we talked about. And through meeting the people at the embassies and also some of the international business leaders I met, especially in the energy area, I rapidly, within a year to 18 months, had learned quite a bit about some of the things going on behind the scenes around the world. It just blew my mind. It really did. Some of the people at the embassies were very much open to the idea of a global system of government. They saw it as a good thing. Now, there were also people at the embassies who I met who were concerned about that. So I did get both points of view, but just the fact that this was, something that was being discussed. And then some of the people in the private sector also, some in favor of global government, others not. I remember being in Taiwan, which we do not officially have an embassy in Taiwan, but we had the equivalent of an embassy. It's called something else, but I had some meetings set up for me there. And one of the gentlemen I met with was the director of a well-known organization in the United States. He ended up, he actually was in the Korean War and then met a gal from Taiwan somehow, got married, and stayed over there. And so as a pretty successful American businessman, was doing a lot of trade in Taiwan. He also happened to be a member of the Associated Press. And we had the most interesting conversation. And at one point, out of the clear blue, he said something to the effect, well, basically about 300 people or so run the world. I said, oh, really? I said, well, tell me about it. Who are these people? He said, well, it's not that they make every single decision of everything that happens, but they have enough influence that they can establish trends and put things in motion and use the media to support those trends and to really bring about major changes, and that it always seems to be in the direction of global government. And we also talked some about the Federal Reserve and the roots of that banking system in the United States. And again, when you consider who this information was coming from, is quite intriguing. And so that planted enough of a seed in me that when I came back, I remember diving in and doing some research of my own into our economic system. And I was an economics major in college, and as I mentioned, I focused on the international side of it, so this really piqued my interest. And I thought, wow, sure enough, everything he said was true. He even gave me a list of people who belonged to certain organizations that were promoting this one world agenda. And it crossed party lines. That was the first thing I noticed. I didn't actually count or do a percentage count, but I'm guessing approximately maybe 60% of the individuals from the United States were in the Democratic Party and maybe 40% or so in the Republican Party. And they were people from major corporations, government organizations like the U.S. State Department, leading educators, some top scientists, a lot of people from the media, from the major networks. Fox was just beginning to come online. In fact, they were really an unknown at that point in time. You had the three major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. And I was amazed at some of the anchors and key reporters from those networks who belong to these organizations. And I also discovered then later on that those same groups were responsible back in the 40s for founding the United Nations.
Right.
In fact, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a committee called the Post-War Foreign Policy Committee, I think is what it was named. And there were 14 people on that committee, and 10 of them were members of the Council on Foreign Relations, the same organization. So it is fair to say that the Council on Foreign Relations really founded the UN. They got it going. If you have 10 out of 14 people in the committee that oversaw that belonging to the same group, and then later on, at the founding meeting in San Francisco, you had well over 100 members of the CFR at that meeting.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interject here something.
Yeah, go ahead.
You probably know the quote from Rockefeller better than me, but didn't he made a public statement where he thanked the media that they couldn't have gone as far as they have towards global government or the UN or their agenda, whatever they're doing, without the help of the media.
Without their help, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And he came out publicly later and thanked them.
Yeah, he did. And something that a lot of people aren't aware of is that the Rockefellers ended up donating the land upon which the United Nations is built.
Right. And I heard that it was a slaughterhouse at one time, so that that would make sense. Having sacrifices going on.
Well, I know about that. I know it was a very rundown, swampy area of Manhattan that at the time wasn't worth a lot. But the Rockefellers, they always come out on top financially, one way or another. Yeah. So when they donated that land and the UN was built on it, all the land prices around there went way up, and they ended up making a ton of money off of it. But nonetheless, they donated that land to the UN, and so the UN ended up in New York City. But the founding convention was held in San Francisco.
San Francisco, okay.
And so the United Nations is really step number 2 in the direction of publicly working toward a global government system. You had the League of Nations formed after World War I in Europe, but the American people smelled a rat. They felt something's not right about this. And so they put pressure on Woodrow Wilson to keep us out of the League of Nations, which was a huge embarrassment to him because he had become the most visible spokesperson on behalf of the League, leading up to its forming. So the second time around, to make sure that America wouldn't back out again, I believe they decided to put it on American soil because it would give Americans the feeling that they're somehow in control of the situation and help them to go along with it. But that came on the heels of World War II. So the trend has been a major global conflict that scares people to death, and then a lot of the damage comes afterwards in the name of peace and unity, saying, hey, we've got to have a global system here to keep countries from fighting each other and keep world peace. And it sounds good on the surface until you begin to analyze who the people are who are forming these organizations and what their ultimate objectives are, and you discover it's not so good after all.
We've got to have that crisis in order to get the change that they want to have take place.
That's what I'm thinking. And history tends to repeat itself. And again, you had World War I, then World War II, and now you see radical Islam and what it's doing. And the people of the civilized world are getting to the point where they're going to have to fight back or just take it lying down. And so my own thinking is that at some point you are going to have the countries of the West unite to fight radical Islam. And it's already beginning to happen. And in the Middle East right now, you have the beginnings of, at the very least, a regional war. We're already at that point, and we'll have to see what it turns into, if it turns into another global conflict. But regardless, with the loss of life and the images on television coming through every night, the people in Syria are suffering immensely. And a lot of them are Christians, and you're not hearing much about that. But very few of the Christian Syrians who fled have been allowed into the United States, which is very interesting. And so this is already turning into a major crisis. And if people are brought to the point where they think, wow, if we don't stop this, the world's going to destroy itself. We have to do something. And then voila, on the heels and the aftermath of whatever is going to happen, you conveniently have a world government proposed, whether it's an empowered United Nations or a brand new organization headquartered in Europe or the Middle East remains to be seen. But that's the track that we're on. That's where things are headed. And I have no doubt about that. Some things I'm not sure about. And I always tell people, this is my opinion. This is what I think could happen. But there are certain things that I'm fully convinced of. And there is an agenda for world government. There are people working hard toward it. It's going to take some type of major crisis, I think, possibly along with a military conflict, an economic crisis. We're getting closer and closer to that point. And then when everything is brought to the brink of collapse or actual collapse, then at that point, the people of the world would be more inclined to listen to a proposed solution. But the old system has to be completely discredited, has to be brought down, has to be viewed as if being a complete wipeout and a failure before they can replace it with something new.
Yeah, and I came to, I've been studying some of the stuff for a few years now, and I didn't believe the conspiracy for a while. And the reason I say that is because some of the stuff that has been started, the people have never lived to see the results. They've never seen the fruit. This has been a slow, gradual process. Mm-hmm. And you would have to think, or at least I would think, well, if somebody's going to do this, they're going to want to see the fruit in their lifetime. And then it hit me one time, I'm like, well, there's a spiritual element to this, or demonic, where they think they're going to get their reward for setting this up somewhere else. But unlike Christians, where we're going to end up in heaven and we're going to have the 1,000-year reign and everything, they're worshiping somebody else, and this is really it's a religion to them on the upper levels, right? On the lower levels, if I got from your book, you
right.
may have the believers that really believe in the global warming or the climate change, but you have those mm-hmm. manipulators at top that know exactly what they're doing, and they have the patience, whether they're going to see the results on earth or not, because this is would it be fair to say a religion for them? Or they're serving they're serving Lucifer?
Right.
Yeah, the one world movement in principle at the higher levels is being driven by religious beliefs. As you said, some of the people lower down, they think they're part of something good. They think they're going to help bring in world peace and world unity. But for this thing to be sustained, this drive toward global government through generations, you're right, it's got to be about more than economics. Because most people don't see, they might see to their children, they want to leave their children well off, but beyond that, they're not thinking down the road. And it took me a while to realize this, but it is true. This is being primarily spiritually driven. It is a spiritual battle. And I'll tell you what their biggest obstacle has been, their biggest challenge is getting Christians on board. Because you have enough Christians in the world that if all of them stood up, took a stand on this issue, it'd be very difficult for them to accomplish it. And so they've been working on neutralizing Christendom. And one way to do that is to gain control of the seminaries, the Christian seminaries, because they put out your next generation of pastors and Christian leaders. Right. And it's amazing all around the country how many of the Christian seminaries are now teaching interfaithism. They're teaching that all religions are pathways to God. It doesn't matter if you believe in Christ or Buddha or whatnot. And it's even happening right here in Indiana with some of, Indiana has a lot of Christian roots, a lot of Christian colleges representing a variety of denominations here. And it's happening right here. There are still a few good ones left, but for the most part, I tell parents if they send their kids to seminary, look out, because that's where some of the greatest mischief is taking place. And then you have thousands of these young people graduating each year, and they go out and take small churches that eventually become big churches. And so they've already been manipulated into believing certain things that aren't true, not even realizing it's part of a bigger agenda. And you have to have a coming together of the world's religions, a type of global unity. I call it a false global unity. In order for there to be a world government, without that, you can't pull off a world government system. And these people have come to understand that, and so the real battle has been fought in the area of religion. And so I tell people we really more than ever have to understand the Bible. We need to know what we believe, why we believe it, have a familiarity with Bible prophecy, because to me, there's more reason today in 2016 to believe in the Lord than ever before. When you consider the track record of Scripture and all the prophecies that Christ fulfilled in his first coming, why wouldn't those concerning his second coming and the times leading up to his second coming, why wouldn't they be equally accurate? And when we read the Bible and look what it says about the last days, the stuff's happening all around us now. 2 generations ago it wasn't, but now it is. And so this should be a wake-up call and also a real confirmation of our faith. So for me, it's hard to understand how people can't believe today. You'd have to be completely ignorant or have allowed yourself to be manipulated by the thinking of others to get to that point.
Yeah,
Right.
The stuff that's going on now with the bathroom thing. I mean, how can it be any more obvious than that?
Well, you got basically it's like they're pushing the sodomite stuff basically to demonize the Christians or anybody that has morals. They say, well, you just hate us, and then then that way they could start outlawing free speech, outlawing Christianity is what that basically that's what I see going on behind a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, what used to be considered good is now viewed as being evil, and evil is good, and that too is a fulfillment of Scripture of how it would be in the last days. And it's amazing how quick, how fast all these things have happened, especially in the last 10 to 20 years. If we would have been having this interview in the late 1980s, early 90s, and we would have projected ahead and said this is what it will be like in 2016, I don't know if we would have been able to believe it, that it would go that quickly, But a complete breakdown in morality leads to a breakdown in family values and family structure, and that's the core of civilization. When you lose that, everything else becomes much easier, and that's where we're at in America now today. You've got maybe 20 to 30% of people who have their heads on pretty straight. They see some of what's going on. They know things aren't right, and they want to make them right. But as far as people who fully get it, where we're at in history and how close we're getting to the end times and the rise of Antichrist, global government, and ultimately the return of Jesus Christ, I think it may be more in the 5 to 7% range, which really seems like a negative statement, but I've traveled around the country now for 25 years, speaking at universities, at churches, at conventions, and really that's my experience. I think you've got basically 5 to 7% of the American public that's really solid in their faith, walking with the Lord, and an understanding of the times in which we're living. So that means about 93 to 95% don't. And so there are even some people who, from an economic and political standpoint, are conservative. Their views would line up to a large degree with ours, but they still don't get the big picture.
Right.
And that's the problem. There just aren't enough people waking up.
Well, Gary, I had a couple of questions about the UN. I seen a lot of things come up recently. Say like with the Pope speaking to Congress back in September, and actually that was it seemed like it was from what I heard it was basically he was announcing that they're going ahead with the world government. Say like I don't know if you heard the pastor Lindsey Williams, where he had some contact with what he calls the global elite, who worked he worked on the pipeline he was a chaplain to a pipeline in Alaska in the 70s.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He said, basically these people that he met with, they make world decisions there. I mean, what they say, goes when they don't always get their way. But what they told him is, basically that there's going to be an announcement that they're going ahead with this world government back, in September, and that lined up with this, visit from the Pope, where he said they're going ahead with this UN agenda. I think it was 2030, and before it was Agenda 21 that they came up with in 1992, and I've seen some of the stuff take place already in South Bend. Say like where in the Studebaker area where the factories have been torn down. There's some signs there where they call that a UN brown site, where basically it looks like UN bought that land, and South Bend sold it to them. That to me that looks like that's what's going on there. There's these roundabouts that are being built everywhere with it seems like government money. I guess there's a lot of things involved with my question here, but so do you have any insight or anything to add to what happened when the Pope was here when he had announced that Agenda 2030, I think it was, and
Yeah, I mean,
do you know anything about these roundabouts and these major changes to the road systems and?
no, I don't know about that, but I know that in the fall when the Pope came, he really strongly endorsed the climate change agenda, which most people are not aware, but it is directly a part of the One World agenda. And they are looking for areas of common cause that can unite the people of the planet behind a purpose to help bring them together and make it easier to bring about world government. And their argument is we have to have world government to solve this problem because it's global in nature and it's too big for any one country. What they're not telling people is that if we as humans do everything perfectly regarding the environment, we can only affect between 3 to 5% of climate change. That's it. So, in other words, if the oceans were to come up 20 feet, which they're not, but if Al Gore was right and they'd come up way up, if they come up 20 feet, they would still come up about 19 feet, regardless of what you do. And so this is where the deception is taking place. People are being hoodwinked. They're not being told the full truth. If they understood that, they'd realize, it's not that we should try to do something, but to try to use this as an argument for world government that somehow humans are going to save the planet, that's just nonsense. It really is. It's nonsense. Not only that, but depending where you measure the temperatures in the world, you can make a pretty strong case that for about 10 years now, temperatures have leveled off and even dropped ever so slightly. And you're not going to hear that either, because many of the scientists in that area, in the area of climate change, are getting major money from the big foundations that are also supporting the One World movement. And if they begin towing another line and saying, wait a second, this isn't accurate, they'll lose their funding and they'll be on their own. Now, there are some brave scientists who are largely self-funded who have taken a stand, like Dr. Michael Kaufman, who, by the way, is very ill with cancer right now. But he has actually testified before Congress, and I consider him a good ally and friend, and he really does his own good research. And we need to be praying for him, yes. But this is just one area. But back to the Pope for a moment, if I may. There are over 1 billion Catholics in the world. Over 1 out of every 7 people. If you think about it, it would be virtually impossible to pull off a world government without the Vatican endorsing global government. I mean, I don't see how they could pull it off without that. So I have said for years, at the very least, the Pope at some point will endorse world government and get on board, and this Pope basically has done that.
Yeah,
I mean, we're to the
right,
point.
yeah.
And it looks like even since John Paul II, they've been bringing together world religions, but they still say that born again Christians are heretics, but they're welcoming all different religions.
Yeah.
Now he's going to this political move here, where with this UN Agenda 20 or 2030, I guess.
Right.
So I mean, this really seems like we're getting close to, Revelation 13, or the setup for that with, a world religion. People, having to take a mark, in the near future.
Yeah. Well, the current Pope Francis just recently met with the top Sunni Muslim cleric from Egypt, who traveled to Rome to the Vatican to meet with the Pope. His name is Ahmed Al Taib, I believe. And he's not the first. And so there are religious leaders, the Dalai Lama representing Buddhism. You've got all the world's religions now, leaders of those religions flocking to Rome, and they're all talking peace and unity. And in the meantime, this war keeps growing in the Middle East. So it seems to me they're beginning to prepare the atmosphere for the aftermath of whatever comes afterwards. And they're going to make a strong push for global peace, unity that includes global government, the surrendering of a lot of our freedoms in the name of the environment and climate change. That's already in motion. I'm going to tell you something interesting. Back in the 80s, I was invited to join an organization that quite blatantly was pushing the world government agenda. And they put out a list at that time of 49 reasons for why we need world government. And if I remember correctly, I think 13 of them had to do with the environment or ecology. And they were talking about the term global warming long before it publicly existed. In fact, just a few years earlier, we were being warned about an ice age. And so they were talking about global warming, and I found that quite fascinating. And so this agenda has been afloat for a long time, and it's just now gained and is gaining traction publicly the way that it is. But it's been 30 or 40 years in the making. And it's all part of the manipulation process. And of course, the media is almost 100% on board. And if there is
stuff's in your book, right? I mean, these letters, because you played detective for a while or undercover agent, and you were on their mailing list.
Yes, I received information for an extended period of time. I was in contact with the Secretary General of that organization at the time. I believe one reason why I was brought on board was because of the background I had in the government. And once I was affiliated with that organization, and I got a look at their list and saw their stationery, which listed some of the members and everything, I was amazed at how many former government leaders, former ambassadors, a former U.S. Attorney General was the vice president of the organization at the time. This is somebody who was committed to the U.S. Constitution, but who had been now promoting a world constitution. They actually had a copy of a world constitution. I've held a copy of it in my hands. And believe it or not, they called it a constitution for the Federation of Earth, which I almost wanted to laugh. I thought that sounds like something out of Star Trek.
Yeah, right.
And so I looked into it a little bit more and discovered that one of the early visionaries that helped to conceive Star Trek was one of the members of this organization. So there was, in fact, probably a connection. It wasn't a coincidence. So you begin to realize how television programs, movies, everything, it's kind of the planet being united against a common enemy. You know, that's the theme. How can they accomplish that? And that's really what it was all about. But Steve, as you mentioned, I reproduced probably 30 or 40 pages of documents in part 2 of my book toward the back that shows some of the letters that I got from these individuals. And it's quite blatant. Back then it was behind the scenes, but now it's out in the open.
Right.
They feel they've achieved a critical mass, and they feel comfortable in increasingly talking about this out in the open.
Well, I think I was going to ask you this earlier. You were talking about when your parents and your grandparents, and you would hear the stories about World War II, and you probably even heard stories from relatives about the Depression and things. Although if they were in Europe at the time, they didn't. I don't remember if the Depression was worse there, or if they were more concerned about the battles. But regardless, we would hear those stories. But the millennials now and generation, I'm trying to think what's before that, Generation X, their views on all of this are different. I mean, they're not hearing the stories. I mean, I would hear the stories about the wars and everything, but now these new generations, they're acclimated to this. So when this comes out in the open, it doesn't set off any bells and whistles, especially when it comes to technology. You talk to a millennial, and you say your phone's spying on you, your TV's spying on you, this is spying on you. They're like, yeah, so I got nothing to hide. It's all out there. I mean, they're not concerned where you talk to somebody, maybe 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're like, hey, this is not right. So I think there's been this gradual, through the education, through the technology, through the media, to where they can be out in the open now, and the younger generations don't think anything of it.
Yeah, it's massive indoctrination, and it's been going on long enough that the young people, for the most part, have bought into it. In fact, the 30 to 35 and under crowd, it's got to be 20 to 30% of them identifying as socialists. I saw a statistic recently, and it just blew my mind. And they don't think there's anything wrong with that, so they have bought into that. And they don't realize how precious our freedoms are and how fortunate we are to have what we have had here in the United States. And, all around the world, people have had it difficult in previous generations. Rarely you make it all the way through one generation and then not face a major challenge. You had World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, but really since World War II, barring the Cuban Missile Crisis, and a few short-lived things, you haven't had the kind of things happen to the current generation where they really have to put their life on the line. And I think we're getting closer and closer to such a point where we are going to have to really defend our freedoms, and who knows what's going to happen over the next few years in the United States and in places overseas. And I'm very concerned about that, and I'm sure you are as well. That's why you're doing this program.
Right now, like Hillary Clinton, basically recently said something about sending people to fun camps, and there's about 1,000 FEMA camps set up around the United States, which are just to me that are basically like a prison camp, where they're going to send people that are not going to cooperate with this world government once things collapse. So I mean, it's like they're talking about these things out in the open on major news networks, and people still aren't putting two together. They're there's like ignoring things that are obvious, like pretending things are getting so bad they just
I think
pretend it's not happening.
A lot of people have the normalcy bias where they just don't want to believe this, and whether it's spiritually, politically. And maybe our last few minutes we can, since you did mention Hillary, Gary, maybe we can talk about the political year and what my concern. And I've been listening to some podcasts of yours this past week while I was out working on the yard and the sod and everything. You were on I think it's Stand for the Truth out of is it Green Bay, Wisconsin, yeah. And there's, like we talked about, there's socialists and a lot more people are accepting of that. My concern, though, a lot of times with Christians is they're not really, governmentally, they're not trying to reduce that governmental structure. They're just saying we need our people in, which we do need our people in, but if that network is there and there's these government controls, that's going to be used for the other side. I mean, once that structure is there, and I think Christians need to get involved more, other than just, hey, we need to vote for a certain person, which is good, but we need to understand the role of government. We need to, and this is probably my libertarian side coming out. Government is really there to protect our rights. They shouldn't be involved in as many things, because when you give government that much control, then you have somebody that's going to attract the devil. That's going to attract the bad side.
It's very difficult to get rid of bureaucracies when they're established.
So, but Christians, I mean, what should be in this current political year? What are your suggestions? I mean, obviously, to be involved to vote? I mean, do we need more people involved? I mean, we need more prayer. We need more revival. What?
Well, all of the above. I wrote an article. It's called America's Reckoning. If people go to our website, it's garycaw.org, and you can look for that article. And also another one I just posted recently called Global Change and the Vatican. And you'll find those articles will be very interesting and enlightening on this very subject. And by the way, garycaw.org is spelled GaryKah.org. I wanted to spell my last name because people spell it all different kinds of ways. So I hope people take advantage of that. But I think as Christians at this point, the first thing we need is spiritual discernment because, I mean, you have to start with that. If you don't have that, you're going to make the wrong decisions on everything else. Right. And everybody has a worldview. Everybody has a religious worldview, whether they say they do or not. And everything else, all the other decisions we make are based upon that worldview. So we need to be anchored and grounded in a Christian worldview and understand exactly what that means. And that will then dictate to a large extent the decisions that we make in every area of life. In the economic area, the indebtedness of Americans it's ridiculous. I mean, and we didn't even talk about that really, but $19 trillion of debt. Now, if you take all the debt together, it averages out about $300,000 per individual now. And so when a baby comes into the world in the United States, basically they're going to be responsible for the equivalent of $300,000 of debt right off the bat. Can't go on much longer. The reason it's gotten so bad, we've gotten further and further away from our Christian principles. And I want it now, I want to have this, and I want it now, immediate satisfaction society. But as far as politics go, you know, if Hillary Clinton gets in, we're going to be facing 4 years, maybe 8 years of this country coming apart at the seams. And I don't know how visible it will be, how quickly it will be, but I was kind of tongue-in-cheek joking with somebody yesterday, and I said, you know, if Donald Trump got elected and you cross him, your business might end up bankrupt. But if you cross Hillary Clinton, you might end up dead. And it's really not something to laugh about, but it's just, I mean, people disappear. They end up dying of mysterious causes if they take a stand regarding the Clintons. The corruption is enormous. Enormous. It's been going for years.
From the Bible.
Yeah. And we've had friends who've lived in Arkansas who know a thing or two, and it's just unbelievable. And to have somebody like that as president, I don't think we ever, for sure, we wouldn't be able to get our country back. Even now it's difficult. But if any more of the Barack Obama years goes on, it would under Hillary Clinton, we're pretty much toast. Right. Go ahead. You were getting ready to say something.
Well, I was going to say, you know, Jesus, like following the patterns of Jezebel, and you know, where she was killing people for land, and you know, it's just, this really demonic, you know, stuff's out in the open, where, you know, like you said, people are being killed, or it seems like, you know, there's a strong possibility that they're killed. I believe they are, you know, that oppose her.
I would say to people, if you know, and it's this whole group thing, we've got to have a woman president now. Well, if really that's how you're going to vote for Jill Stein. She's not as evil as Hillary. If it's just because you want to vote for a woman, but they're playing that up there. We need, and you see that in the media. I don't know if you remember back in '08, and I don't want this to come out wrong because a lot of times when you bring up black, white, all of a sudden you're racist. But the commercials, I had noticed when companies were promoting something that, and even TV shows, there was a problem, and it was a black person that came in with the solution. They were going up to Obama for that. Now I've noticed in TV shows, and I don't watch commercials really that much anymore, but now it's the woman that's doing this. So this media is behind it. It's getting everybody's attention. Well, yeah, we need this group in, and we need that group in, and you know, the next time it may be, well, we need somebody. You'll start seeing in the media, it's the LBG, Gary DQ,
yeah, whatever.
I can't remember that, but we'll see that the next cycle, that they're the ones with the solution, and it's that pre-programming that we have to have Hillary, no matter all the stuff that she's done. There's people out there, well, we've got to elect her because she's a woman.
Yeah, and what we really need is the best person for the job. Whoever would do the best job of keeping our constitutional republic together. And but that's not how people are thinking now. People are voting much more on emotion these days. And again, they don't have the correct worldview, and so the decisions that flow out of their worldview, they're going to be incorrect most of the time. It's not coming from a moral-based Judeo-Christian ethic anymore. It's coming from a view of all religions are pathways to God. It really doesn't matter what we believe. We're just advanced, evolved animals, and therefore whatever the majority decides is correct, that's what's correct. And so, yeah, I mean, we can't solve all the world's problems on the program here tonight, but what we can say is when everything is said and done, when people have looked into everything else and dabbled in every other religion, they come up empty because they're all self-centered. They're all about me. And when that is where it all ends, and that's the best you can do, when it comes time for you to die, you're going to be scared to death. You're going to be afraid of what awaits you. But when you place your hope in Jesus Christ and know that He's the one that paid the penalty for our sins on the cross, because there's no way we can do anything to become perfect and to get into eternity. Something had to be done on our behalf. And God, praise His name, sent Jesus to die on the cross, pay the penalty for our sins. And so we have peace with God, with the Creator. And so we're beginning from that platform and moving up from there. And so we don't have the fear of death. I don't. I mean, I look forward to being in eternity with the Lord someday. And when you have that outlook on life, and it allows you to be more compassionate to other people. You look at the hospitals that have been founded over the last 100 years and the orphanages overseas. 80 to 90% of them were founded by Christians.
Yeah.
Almost none by people from other religions. There are just a few, and only that has happened fairly recently, largely because I think they're thinking, wow, we really look bad next to the Christians. They're the ones helping everybody.
Right.
Our daughter worked at a hospital in an Islamic country in Africa as a nurse. 98% Islamic. They had no care for women and children, only men. And so this was a women and children's hospital. And the Muslim people in that community really appreciated the hospital because of everything they were doing for them, you know. But it was a Christian hospital, and of course they became a target of sorts. And so our daughter and the others there were strongly urged to leave by the embassy in that country because they said they can't be responsible for them. Terrorists hit a radio station tower just about half a mile away from them, and things got pretty dicey. It was in Mali, West Africa. But my point being that you've got Christians out there giving of themselves selflessly because they see a bigger picture. They realize it's not all about them, but it's about these precious souls out there who, unless they get the truth and embrace Christ as their Savior, they're lost. They may have it good for a time in this earth, and some of them don't even have it good here. They have it terrible here, and then they'll have it even worse in eternity. And so that's really where our focus needs to be, and therefore politically our focus ought to be on any candidates that give us the maximum amount of constitutional freedom to speak the truth without reservation. And I'm concerned if the wrong candidates get in this cycle, you're going to start seeing the 501c3 status, tax-exempt status of churches being threatened if they take a stand on anything. And it's just a matter of time till that ends up being used for political purposes. And then Christians will lose their ability to speak out on anything, and you're going to have a watered-down Christianity, and that's already beginning to happen in this country.
And that's what they really did. It's that the pursuit of money and the churches with the 501c3 worried about their tax status. And I think with that, like you said, there's certain things that they can't say under threat that they may lose something, right? Losing that
Correct.
status.
Yeah. That's one reason we never got that status, and it's made it more difficult for us to exist because people can't take tax deductions for donations. But I just felt early on it was important for me to be able to speak freely and openly about everything, and I don't want to be in a position to be able to be blackmailed on something. Yeah. And if we lose our freedom of speech here, it's pretty much going to go down everywhere else pretty quickly afterwards. But I just want to say this yet. I'm noticing an interesting trend over the last few years. It used to be that small business owners, when they get in their 50s and go into semi-retirement, they buy second homes in places like Florida or South Texas. Now they're buying those homes overseas in other countries. That's really unprecedented, except for the super rich. But I'm talking about small business owners. And talking to them, the main reason is they see what's happening in this country, and they want to get one foot out the door and have another option of where to live. And so they're seeking places that still have a fair level of freedom at this point in time. But the doors are closing on that. And even there, in some of these countries now, well, in all the countries overseas, they have to report every bank account to the IRS. Yeah. And so a lot of banks don't want to take American money anymore because they don't want to have to mess with all that red tape. And I just learned recently that if you want to open up a bank account in Singapore as an American, a couple of the banks require it's a minimum of $200,000 and another one just up to $300,000. So they'll still take your money if it's enough, to make it worth their pain, but it's becoming more and more difficult. And so all that to say, if things go down here, there aren't a lot of options for people. And so we really, if people understood what is at stake in this upcoming election at the state, local level, at the national level, up and down the spectrum, every Christian believer, every conservative should be out there voting. History will show that if we do well, maybe 50 to 60% of conservatives will be out there voting. But I'd like to see it in the 90 to 100% range. Because we do have some good people in Congress right now, in spite of everything that's being said. There are some good, solid members in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And I'm afraid some of them could lose this time, depending how things fall between now and November. And so we really do need to get out there and vote and take a stand in every other way that we can.
And number one is we need to, like you said, know Jesus Christ, get the discernment, know that first, and then everything we can spiral out from there, and we can
get things right with Jesus. Right. You're prepared to die at any time because you know where you're going. You're going to heaven, and the Bible warns us about not being fearful. That just holds us back from doing what we're supposed to do.
Right.
Once we get that out of the way, okay, then we can start working on some things maybe to hold back. Give us some more time here. Give us some more time where we have freedom. If we could hold that back, if more people would repent, fast, and pray, maybe God will hold some of this judgment back. Give us more time to get more friends, family members saved. That's what we're doing here. We're trying to get people to wake up. Let them know that time is short, and we're not. God's not fooling around.
That's right.
Now.
Well, Gary, we need to wrap up here. We do appreciate you taking the time and talking with us. And we did want to talk about everything, but we only had an hour, so. But definitely, everybody check out Gary's books. And I'm going to have his website up on the screen, garyka.org, correct?
That is correct, okay. Yes,
and we'll have the right spelling on there. You do public, or not public, but you'll speak at churches. You still do that, correct?
Yes, I do, okay. Yeah.
What, if somebody wanted to have you in, is that on your website, or do they need to contact you? What's the criteria to get you to come in and speak?
Yeah, they can get in contact with us. The best way to do it is on our website, in the order section, there's an order line that you can call by telephone, and that's one way you can get through to us. And the other way is by writing us through the mail, and we have our physical address on there, and then we can get back in touch with people. The reason we don't have our email posted is because of the huge volume of communication we get. It's almost nightmarish. I mean, we can't read everything that comes in. So, but people can get hold of us if they want to. So,
Yeah, that
we
kind
encourage.
of screens out the people that aren't serious.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, we would just encourage people to help in every way they can. You know, I'm one person. I've been doing this 25 years, trying to warn people and get people to wake up. And we don't have to be all things to all people. We just have to speak the truth, do it in a tactful and credible way, and in a spirit of love. And a certain percentage of people are going to listen. Some aren't. But don't get discouraged over that. Just share for the sake of those who will listen. And if everybody does that, we could still have at least a mini revival in this country. Maybe God will give us some more time.
Amen.
Well, maybe we can get you to come up here to our church here in South Bend. Maybe when we're getting a new building.
Right. Well, we have a building right now where, well, we can talk to you later about this, but, you know, do we have a place where you could speak and
You know how to get hold of me.
we could set that up and definitely, okay, the people need to hear this, you know, whether it's in person or on TV. So we appreciate you. And
Thank you for this opportunity. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, and thank you.
God bless
Definitely
you, Gary.
check out Gary's books and websites. And once I get this edited, I'll send you the link, and it'll be on YouTube as well as TV up here in South Bend. So.